Chapter 11, Force and Pressure. Musk Science, Cambridge University Press. About this video. This video is based only on questions and answers designed for better understanding of key concepts, helps in quick revision and exam preparation. Let's dive into the world of force and pressure through simple car. Force and pressure. Questions and answers. What do we experience in our everyday life? We experience different kinds of force in our everyday life. Why is it important to learn about different kinds of force? It is important to learn about force because it impacts our lives. Why should we become aware of the effects of force such as friction, gravity, and magnetic force? We should become aware of these effects because they help us understand how force works in our surroundings. What powers everything on Earth? Everything on Earth is powered by force. What kinds of actions act on our bodies and the things around us? Pushes and pulls act on our bodies and the things around us. Can you identify the type of force being applied in a given situation? Yes. The force can either be a push or a pull depending on the action. Is it a pull or a push? It can be either a pull or a push based on the direction of the applied force. Can force also stop things from moving? Yes. Force can also stop things from moving. What must be done to get something to move? To get something to move, it must be either pushed or pulled. What do we do with the rope in a game of tug-of-war? We pull the rope in a game of tug-of-war. What action is performed with a thumb pin on a board? We push the thumb pin to fix it on a board. What do we do to a shopping cart while moving through a grocery store? We push the shopping cart while moving through a grocery store. How can most daily actions be grouped? Most daily actions can be grouped as a push or a pull. What does every push or pull exerted result in? Every push or pull results in a force. What is force? A push or a pull on an object is known as force. What actions require force to be exerted? Actions like pushing, pulling, lifting, and twisting require force. In which activities is force used? Force is used in pushing or pulling a box, pressing a pedal, or opening and closing a door. What are some examples of force being used in daily life? Stretching an exercise band, crushing a can, and lifting boxes are examples of force in daily life. Why is force needed in activities like lifting, turning, and pushing? Force is needed to make an object move, stop, change direction, or change shape. Can more than one force act on an object at the same time? Yes, more than one force can act on an object at the same time. What different forces are needed to ride a bicycle? We need to push the pedals, push and pull the handlebars and brakes, and balance using muscles. What do our feet do to the pedals while riding a bicycle? Our feet push the pedals while riding a bicycle. What do our hands do to the handlebars and brakes? Our hands push and pull the handlebars and brakes. How do our muscles help while riding a bicycle? Our muscles help us stay balanced on the bicycle. What do the tires of a bicycle push against? The tires push against the ground. What does the ground do in response to the tires? The ground pushes back on the tires. What is one characteristic of force related to interaction? Force requires interaction between at least two objects. What happens to a football placed on the ground at the start of a match? The football stays still until a force is applied. When will the football move? The football will move only when someone kicks or pushes it. Why is interaction between objects necessary for force? Because force only occurs when objects interact. What is required for a force to come into play? At least two objects must interact for a force to act. What results in a push or pull upon an object? Interaction with another object results in a push or pull. Can living and non-living things apply force on another object? Yes, both living and non-living things can apply force. What is one common misconception about force? A common misconception is that force is something an object has inside it. What is the definition of force in relation to objects? Force is exerted on one object by another through interaction. What is meant by magnitude of force? Magnitude is the strength or size of the force applied. What happens when football players kick a ball? They apply a certain amount of force to move the ball. When is more strength used while kicking a football? More strength is used when trying to score a goal. When is less strength used while passing the ball? Less strength is used when passing the ball to a teammate. How is the strength of a force usually expressed? It is expressed by its magnitude. What happens to the football when force is applied in a certain direction? The football moves in the direction of the force applied. What is required to change the direction of a moving ball? A force must be applied in the desired direction. What are two key characteristics of force? Force has both magnitude and direction. What happens when two equal forces push in opposite directions? The object does not move because the forces are balanced. What are balanced forces? Balanced forces are equal forces acting in opposite directions, cancelling each other out. What happens when two people push a box with equal force in opposite directions? The box does not move. Why does the box not move in the case of balanced forces? Because the effects of the two forces cancel each other. What is the resultant force when forces are balanced? The resultant or net force is zero. What happens when two forces are not equal in strength? The object moves in the direction of the stronger force. What are unbalanced forces? Unbalanced forces are forces that are not equal in strength and cause movement. What happens when one person pushes a box harder than another in the opposite direction? The box moves in the direction of the stronger push. Why do unbalanced forces cause movement? Because the stronger force is not cancelled out by the weaker force. What is a spring balance or Newton's balance? It is a device used to measure the force acting on an object. What are the components of a Newton's balance? It consists of a coiled spring, a graduated scale, and a pointer. What happens to the spring when force is applied in Newton's balance? The spring stretches when force is applied. What does the pointer measure in a spring balance? The pointer measures how much the spring is stretched. What does the reading on the scale of a spring balance indicate? It indicates the magnitude of the force applied. Force and its effects. Questions and answers. What happens if you and your friend both push in the same direction? If you and your friend both push in the same direction, the net force equals the sum of the individual forces. What happens if two forces act in opposite directions? If two forces act in opposite directions, the net force is found by subtracting the smaller force from the larger one. What happens if two forces act in the same direction? If two forces act in the same direction, the net force is the total of both forces added together. Classifying forces as push or pull. How can we define force based on motion? We can define force as a push or a pull acting on an object to cause motion. Is opening a refrigerator door a push or a pull? Opening a refrigerator door is a pull. Is crushing a can a push or a pull? Crushing a can is a push. Is lifting a suitcase a push or a pull? Lifting a suitcase is a pull. Is pressing a light switch a push or a pull? Pressing a light switch is a push. Interaction of objects to create force. Which of these activities indicates one object applying force on another? A batsman hitting a cricket ball indicates one object applying force on another. Which two objects must interact to lift a heavy bucket? The hand and the bucket must interact to lift the heavy bucket. Effects of force. Can we see force directly? No, we cannot see force directly, but we can observe its effects. What are the two general effects of force? Force can change the state of motion of an object and can change the shape of an object. What is the SI unit of force? The SI unit of force is the Newton. Who is the Newton unit named after? The unit Newton is named after the English physicist Isaac Newton. How force changes state of motion. What are the two states of motion of an object? An object can either be at rest or in motion. What is the state of rest? The state of rest is when an object is not moving and has zero speed. What is meant by change in state of motion? A change in the state of motion occurs when force makes an object start moving, stop moving, or change its speed or direction. How does force make a stationary object move? Force is applied to make a stationary object, like a cycle, start moving. How does force change the speed of a moving object? By pushing faster or slower. Force can increase or decrease the speed of a moving object. How does force change the direction of a moving object? Force can change direction when applied through actions like turning a handlebar on a cycle. How does force make a moving object stop? Applying brakes is a force that stops a moving object. How force changes shape. Can force change the shape and size of an object? Yes, force can change both the shape and the size of an object. How does a potter use force to shape clay? A potter uses force to press and mold the clay into a different shape and size on the potter's wheel. Predicting motion based on force. Person A pushes a box with a certain force and person B helps by pushing in the same direction. How does it affect the box? It increases the speed of the box. You pick up a few books lying on a table and put them in your bag. How does it affect the books? The force applied makes a stationary object move. Force and shape change. Questions and answers. What happens when Anu blows air into a balloon? The shape of the balloon changes. What effect of force will be seen on the balloon when Anu pushes it with both hands? Its shape changes. Types of forces. Questions and answers. What are the two main types of forces? The two main types of forces are contact forces and non-contact forces. What are contact forces? Contact forces are forces that are exerted when two objects are in physical contact. What is muscular force? Muscular force is the force applied by our muscles to push or pull objects. In which daily activities is muscular force used? Muscular force is used in activities like exercising, walking, eating, and riding a bicycle. What is frictional force? Frictional force is the force that opposes the motion between two surfaces in contact. What causes a rolling ball to stop on the ground? Frictional force between the ball and the ground causes it to stop. Where does friction occur? Friction occurs between two surfaces that are in contact. On what does the amount of friction depend? The amount of friction depends on the nature of the surfaces involved. Which surface has more friction? Rough or smooth? Rough surfaces have more friction than smooth surfaces. What is an example of frictional force on a smooth surface? A ball rolling far on a smooth ground before stopping is an example. What is an example of frictional force on a rough surface? A ball barely moving on a rough carpet is an example. Non-contact forces. Questions and answers. What are non-contact forces? Non-contact forces are forces that act without physical contact between objects. What is gravitational force? Gravitational force is the force of attraction that pulls objects towards each other. What happens when you jump up in the air? You are pulled back to the ground due to gravitational force. What is the force that pulls all objects towards the earth called? It is called gravitational force or gravity. Is gravity only a property of the earth? No. Every object in the universe exerts gravitational force. What force keeps planets in their orbits? Gravitational force keeps planets in their orbits. What are examples of gravitational force in daily life? Fruits falling from trees, water flowing from a tap, and a ball falling back after being thrown upward are examples. What is electrostatic force? Electrostatic force is the force between charged objects. What happens when you rub a balloon on your hair? The balloon becomes charged and attracts your hair. What causes your hair to stand towards the balloon? The electrostatic force from the charged balloon causes it. What are some examples of electrostatic force in daily life? Crackling of sweaters, plastic combs attracting paper, and balloons sticking to walls are examples. In the plastic ruler experiment, why does the ruler on the bottle rotate away? Because the similarly charged rulers repel each other. What is magnetic force? Magnetic force is the force exerted by a magnet on magnetic materials. What happens when a magnet is brought close to a refrigerator door? The magnet sticks to the door due to magnetic force. Why does a magnet not stick to a glass bottle? Because glass is not a magnetic substance. Can a magnet act on another magnet without touching it? Yes, a magnet can act on another magnet without contact. What happens when like poles of two magnets are brought together? Like poles repel each other. What happens when unlike poles of two magnets are brought together? Unlike poles attract each other. How does the distance between a magnet and an object affect magnetic force? The closer the magnet is, the stronger the magnetic force. What are examples of magnetic force in daily life? Magnets attracting coins, metal clips, and other magnets are examples. Identifying types of forces. Questions and answers. Which of these is an example of contact force? Pressing a clay ball is an example of contact force. Which of these is an example of non-contact force? An apple falling from a tree is an example of non-contact force. At a birthday party, kids rubbed balloons on their sweaters and stuck them to the wall. Which force caused this? Electrostatic force caused the balloons to stick to the wall. Why do you think that particular force caused the balloons to stick? Because rubbing the balloons gave them electric charges that created attraction. Pressure. Questions and answers. What is pressure? Pressure is the force acting on a given area. What happens when you press a sharp pencil between your fingers? You feel more pain on the finger pressing the pointed end. Why do you feel more pain on the finger pressing the pointed end of a pencil? Because the force is concentrated over a smaller area, creating more pressure. What does the effect of force on a surface depend on? It depends on the area over which the force is applied. What happens when force is spread over a smaller area? The pressure increases. What happens when force is spread over a larger area? The pressure decreases. How is pressure defined? Pressure is defined as force per unit area. What are some real-life examples where pressure is important? Pressure helps boats float, airplanes fly, straws suck water, and balloons hold their shape. Here are the questions and answers based on the latest section of your content about pressure, force, area, and liquid pressure, written clearly and completely with all numbers in words and no symbols. Pressure, force, and area. Questions and answers. What is the mathematical relationship between pressure, force, and area? Pressure equals force divided by area. What is the formula to calculate pressure? Pressure equals force divided by area. What happens to pressure when the area decreases while force remains constant? Pressure increases when the area decreases. What happens to pressure when the area increases while force remains constant? Pressure decreases when the area increases. What is the C unit of pressure? The C unit of pressure is the Pascal. 1 Pascal is equal to how much force per unit area? 1 Pascal is equal to 1 Newton per square meter. Who is the unit Pascal named after? The unit Pascal is named after Blaise Pascal, a French mathematician and physicist. Practical applications of pressure. Questions and answers. Why do we wear snowshoes instead of high-heeled boots on snow? Snowshoes spread body weight over a larger surface area, creating less pressure, so we do not sink into the snow. Why do tractors and machines that move on soft ground have wide tires? Wide tires spread the machine's weight over a large surface area, reducing pressure and preventing sinking. Why do camels and elephants have broad feet? Their broad feet reduce pressure by spreading their body weight over a larger surface, helping them walk on soft ground. Why do bags and suitcases have broad straps and handles? Broad straps increase the area of contact, reducing pressure on hands and shoulders. Why does a sharp knife cut better than a blunt knife? A sharp knife has a smaller surface area at the edge, which creates greater pressure and helps it cut easily. Why do athletes wear shoes with spikes? The spikes create greater pressure on the ground, providing better grip and traction. Why do tools like spades have sharp and thin edges? Thin edges concentrate force over a small area, increasing pressure and making digging easier. Why do nails and needles have sharp tips? Sharp tips reduce the area of contact, increasing pressure so they can enter materials more easily. Liquid pressure. Questions and answers. Do liquids exert pressure? Yes. Liquids exert pressure on objects immersed in them. What happens when an object is immersed in a liquid? The liquid exerts an upward force on the object. What determines whether an object floats or sinks in a liquid? If the object's weight is less than the upward force of the liquid, it floats. Otherwise, it sinks. What happens to liquid pressure as depth increases? Liquid pressure increases with depth. What is the effect of water pressure on the walls of a container? Water exerts pressure on the walls of the container. Why are dams built stronger and thicker at the bottom? Because water pressure increases with depth and the lower parts must withstand higher pressure. Why do deep-sea divers wear special suits? They wear suits to protect themselves from the high pressure of deep water. What do liquids exert at the same depth? At the same depth, liquids exert equal pressure in all directions. Pressure in fluids. Questions and answers. On what does the pressure of a fluid depend? The pressure of a fluid depends on the height of the column of fluid above the point where the pressure is measured. Will the pressure be the same at the bottom of a wide shallow cylinder and a tall narrow cylinder? If both contain the same volume of water? No. The pressure will be greater at the bottom of the tall narrow cylinder because the column of water is taller. In two identical cylinders with different amounts of water, where will the pressure at the bottom be greater? The pressure will be greater in the cylinder with the taller column of water. What does a taller column of liquid do to the pressure at the bottom? A taller column of liquid increases the pressure at the bottom. Pressure in gases. Questions and answers. Do gases exert pressure? Yes. Gases exert pressure just like liquids do. Why does a bicycle ride feel smoother when the tires are filled with air? The air inside the tire acts as a cushion, absorbing bumps and making the ride smoother. What happens to the ride when air is removed from the tires? The ride becomes rougher because the air pressure is reduced and the tires cannot absorb the bumps effectively. Why does a metal can get crushed when inverted into cold water after boiling water inside it? The steam inside condenses, reducing the air pressure inside the can, and the greater outside pressure crushes the can. What happens to the pressure inside the can when the steam condenses? The pressure inside the can becomes very low because the steam turns into water, reducing the volume of gas inside. What causes a balloon to burst when too much air is blown into it? The air pressure inside becomes too high and stretches the balloon beyond its limit, causing it to burst. What causes gas pressure in a closed container? Gas pressure is caused by particles in the gas moving and colliding with the walls of the container. What happens to the pressure of a gas when it is heated? The pressure increases because the gas particles move faster and collide with the container walls more often. Why does pressure increase when more air is pumped into a balloon? More air particles means more collisions inside the balloon, which increases the pressure. Atmospheric pressure. Questions and answers. What is the atmosphere? The atmosphere is the layer of air that surrounds the Earth. What is atmospheric pressure? Atmospheric pressure is the pressure exerted on an object by the weight of the air above it. Why do we not feel the pressure exerted by the atmosphere? Because the air inside our bodies exerts an equal pressure outwards, balancing the atmospheric pressure. What causes your ears to pop during airplane takeoff and landing? The popping happens because your ears are adjusting to the change in atmospheric pressure. Is atmospheric pressure the same at all places on Earth? No. Atmospheric pressure changes depending on the altitude of a place. How does altitude affect atmospheric pressure? The higher the altitude, the lower the atmospheric pressure because the air becomes less dense. What instrument is used to measure atmospheric pressure? A barometer is used to measure atmospheric pressure. How does a mercury barometer work? A mercury barometer measures air pressure based on the height of a mercury column, which rises or falls with changes in pressure. What is the modern instrument used to measure air pressure? A digital barometer is most commonly used today to measure air pressure. Who uses barometers to make forecasts and study weather? Meteorologists use barometers to measure air pressure and study weather patterns. What kind of weather is usually associated with low pressure areas? Low pressure areas are usually associated with cloudy skies, rainfall, and storms. What kind of weather is usually associated with high pressure areas? High pressure areas are usually associated with clear skies and good weather. You've completed Chapter 11, Force and Pressure. Recap. Key concepts covered through questions and answers focused on easy understanding and quick revision. Thank you for watching. Keep revising, stay curious. See you in the next chapter.